G'day, this is Michael Waugh with John Broughton on KC Radio 97.7 FM.
Hey, congratulations on this record. It's a fantastic piece of work. You must be really proud.
Oh, thank you, John. It's kind of ironic to be talking about releasing something when we're all so very locked down. But yeah, no, it's great for it to be out in the world.
Are all these, I guess you call them COVID era songs, they're all written during lockdown times?
The majority of them, yeah. So the songs come from, at the beginning of 2020, we lost my dad passed away. About 6.5 weeks later, my mum passed away. And then 2 weeks after Mum's funeral, we all went into the first set of lockdown. So a lot of the songs are kind of written through that period of grieving. And also it was a time when normally I'd be kind of touring different places and rushing around with different bits and pieces. And it was a time where I had to be really still. So, yeah, that's where the songs come from.
I think any of the songs may have turned out a little differently if they weren't written in lockdown. Do you think the lockdown experience actually influenced the way they were written?
Good question. I don't know. I think when I write very personally, and I think I'm not one of those writers who kind of, goes into a room with a stranger to write a song on a particular theme. It's very much like when the inspiration hits me and what the feeling is that I need to kind of work through when that happens. So I would guess that they would be very different, probably, yeah. I kind of have reflected that that's part of the reason why the record is called The Cast, because it was like having a broken limb and being stuck inside a cast. You kind of were itching to get out, but you needed to be held still in order to heal. And it was kind of, it was a lot of that, like a process of feeling like these were songs that I was written while I was pulling myself back together.
Yeah. Once again, you've gone with Shane Nicholson, of course, as your producer, who's certainly in great demand for his production work these days. What is it about Shane that works well for you as a producer, the qualities that he has that fit perfectly for you?
I think he thinks about production always from the perspective of a songwriter. So I think that's in part that sensitivity that he brings. I think he understands that world of alt country folk that I kind of inhabit. I think he's also someone who is deeply impacted by the writing that I do. Like, he really feels it, but he has this kind of very cool approach to it as well. So he can kind of distance himself enough from it to be able to shape the song in the way that it is. And I think too, like, he's someone that I've formed this, friendship with over all these years. And so, especially this time everything that I've been going through, my family's been going through, he is, someone who, like, I was able to trust with some of those feelings, and like you do with a trusted friend. So, yeah, those are all the reasons why I think I went with him on this.
Even though you went with the same producer as usual, was there anything different you wanted to approach about the recording of the album compared to the other three?
Well, perhaps not so much things that I wanted to do differently as opposed to things that we had to do differently. For a start, we were in different states through most of the recording process. So that was something that was really tough. But yeah, look, I think in some ways too that there was like, part of the process was just feeling like I'm sending all these feelings out to the world. I'm sending out all of these emotions, and I'm having to make sense of them as they come back to me. So I kind of put raw things into a Dropbox, and he was sending me back quite beautiful things. I said to him recently, it was like, you took all the broken bits of me and made them sound beautiful. So, yeah.
It's a lovely way to put it. As you mentioned, you went through some tough times last year, losing both your parents within months of each other, and your parents have featured so much in your songs through your previous albums that people who know your music probably feel they know them really well. I imagine emotionally it must have been, was it a whole different journey for you writing about them after their passing than previous?
Yeah. I think, my parents were people that I try not to think too much about the audience while I'm writing. I try to write for myself rather than thinking about how someone will perceive it. But I think inevitably, as a writer, you've got these people that you imagine listening to them. And my parents weren't just the subject of a lot of the songs that I wrote. They were often the audience that I was kind of writing for. It's like, would this story make sense for my mum and dad?
Mm-hmm.
And I think after they passed, there was a number of things that I was able to say that I probably couldn't have said when they were alive. But too, like the songs that I have written about mum and dad on this record, they kind of reflect different stages of grieving for me. So there's some that are, there's a song there that's very much about regret, and the song on there that's very much about trying to hold on to them and to keep them with me, and obviously just all of those different feelings that you go through when you lose someone.
I imagine your parents would have been quite influential in you initially developing a love for music too.
Well, my dad was completely tone deaf, so I think, and my mum didn't really have, or Mum sang very well in church, but she kind of wasn't a musician, and they were both kind of scratching their head, wondering where it was that I got my interest from. But they were certainly influential in terms of my taste of music, because it was a case of, learn to love country music or jump out of a moving vehicle, because they would play these story songs consistently. And I think that that was those were the songs that I loved, like the story songs that had a twist in their tale that kind of led the audience to think one thing, and then suddenly you feel something, you got the emotional rug pulled out from under you. And so they very much influenced that part of my writing.
Now, you're also a teacher. Balancing a teaching career and a music career, is that something you've mastered the art of having them coexist?
I love this idea of mastery, because I'm nowhere near being completely on top of any of it. I think it is something that is. I think I'm a better teacher because I make music. And I think I'm a better musician because I teach. Okay. And the reason why I say that is because I work within the performing arts field, and so when I teach, I'm teaching kids to kind of be vulnerable and teaching kids to go through a process of development and about crafting and refining and all of those things that you do as a creative artist. And I think, because I make music myself, it means that I'm more sensitive to how out there you can feel as an artist when you're making someone, especially when there's a critical voice kind of trying to guide you along the path. Yeah. And I think too, in terms of music, there is certainly, the role of contemporary musicians is that you've kind of got to be your own publicist consistently, and I think that's a really disorienting thing. And I think being a teacher means that I have to be real, because Year 7 won't kind of put up with you being too up yourself, and keeping an eye in on humanity, and that's kind of that's what most interests me as a writer. Is kind of capturing those moments, and there's a song on the new record called Foursquare, which is like trying to capture this game that I've seen kids play over years and years of like doing yard duty outside the Memorial Hall and watching this vicious game with a tennis ball unfolding and trying to get inside the head of that person. And it's kind of, yeah, because I think it is like good songwriting, I think, is an act of empathy, but I think good teaching is an act of empathy too.
Yeah, for sure. Were you always open to your students knowing about your other role as a musician and songwriter, or was there a time where you tried to keep it all separate?
No, I was like really, I thought I didn't want to be that daggy teacher who was trying to be something else. That was initially how I saw it. I kind of kept hiding it but you know, kids have internet access, so that of course they found me as soon as I was up there, and they really there was a couple of songs on the first album, especially one called Paul, which is a song about bullying, and kids, that was kind of the first types of ways that kids started talking to me about music, because they'd say, I heard Paul, I really like it. And that was kind of like code for saying you were able to say part of what I'm experiencing. And I recognised that it wasn't something that I should be embarrassed about. Potentially it was a way of having a conversation with kids about their own art and their own art making. And so I put it out there for that. And you know, like I don't come into every class and say, hey, we're going to talk about Mr. Waugh's music now, but you know, there's sometimes, like, you know, with the release of, you know, this album, there was one particular group of kids who often ask about my music, and I talk to them about it, and we got to talk about what that process was like of making it and sharing it, and I think it does help as kids who are really interested in the creative arts, which the kids that I teach are. Like, it's a great opportunity to sort of say, hey, you can have this thing in your world which is just good for your soul, because I think that making music or making any form of art is good for the soul, and it doesn't have to be your only source of income, because certainly I think boys often get the message about them having to be breadwinners, and they're going to school in order to learn how to be a breadwinner, and so that kind of, I think, is a really important message that I'm trying to put out there too.
Now, let's talk about this album specifically. If you could stamp an overall theme that runs through the album, would there be one?
Yeah, I suppose, like I said, that's why I called the record The Cast. It's this like idea of, you know, there's songs about being broken, but also songs about healing. So I think that in all of the tracks, in one way or another, there's a sense of a character being broken in some way, but always looking to be whole again. The first song on the record is like Swollen, which is kind of one of the darker songs on the album. And I was initially I'm not sure that I should put this out there first. In fact, wasn't exactly sure that I should reveal that part of myself at all initially. But then it was like, no, I'm gonna put it out there, because there is this line right at the beginning about, you know, I crave to be filled with love, but constantly I'm empty. And that's kind of that in kind of a sentence is kind of what the record's about.
I was going to ask you about that song Swollen. It deals with an intensely personal issue. So you were going through mixed emotions there about whether to actually put it out there or not.
Yeah. Well, it's a song about an eating disorder and my relationship with food, which has been, you know, a pretty ugly relationship for most of my life. And I've always been pretty embarrassed about it, pretty ashamed about it. And I didn't hear lots of men, I didn't have many examples anyway of men kind of talking about eating disorders, apart from to make, you know, disparaging jokes about being fat. And for me, it was kind of this really, really horrible thing that, you know, it was about kind of seeking comfort through food and then punishing myself through food. And none of it was good. None of it was good. And especially because my brother has been sick and my parents obviously were sick and then passed away. And through that time, I kept looking at all of these pictures of myself being overweight and unhappy. And I kind of had this realization that it was like seeing a broken me. It's like swollen with poison or swollen with, as you do when you, like it says in the song, swollen like a twisted ankle. It's like, and I don't want this to control me anymore. And I think silence around it was part of what was controlling me, because I wasn't able to name it and say, hey, this is what it means for me. I think it's been really, the record's not been out for all that long, and a couple of women have said to me, I'm really glad that you said this because it resonates with my experience of an eating disorder as well. And I don't want to pretend that I know exactly what it's like to be a woman experiencing that issue, but it's my attempt anyway to add this kind of perspective to the conversation.
The song Dark, I saw described as a portrait of the pub rock culture, and in your case in particular, a Ringers nightclub in Sale. Tell us about a typical night at Ringers as you remember it.
Well, it was kind of pretty dangerous place to be, actually. It's like pretty toxic, but fun at the same time. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. I suppose I was, as a kid, I kind of wanted to be a part of that fun, but I always felt a little bit overwhelmed by that energy, which is kind of pretty dangerous. So again, this for me was a song where I was trying to get inside the head of somebody else, and it was that person who, was picking fights at the pub, or, kind of making disparaging comments, or kind of shooting dirty looks around the room, or hitting on women in a pretty ugly way. But it's trying to make sense of that energy that kind of finds itself in those types of bars. But it's a typical country pub. It was like, there'd be, I don't know, young tradies and people from football fresh from the football field, or there'd be FIFO workers from Esso, which is the oil rig, and they'd be chugging lemon ruskies and dancing around handbags, and all of that, fights breaking out in the toilets, kind of dangerous and fun, and I think you do grow up and away from those things, but there's an element I think we still kind of see in nightclubs, and you kind of forget, you can forget that you can paint a picture of those nightclub scenes with nostalgia, but I think it's pretty dark, which is why we call which is why I call the song Dark.
Quite an eye-catching video for that song, which I believe involves some of your students. Tell us about putting that together and the concept behind the reverse motion part of it.
Yeah. Well, I kept trying to explain this to people, and they kept thinking that I was crazy. But the idea was like a palindrome. So it means, the film means one thing when you read it in one direction, and another thing when you read it in the other direction. So the front part of the video works in reverse motion. So we're reversing through someone's experience of a night, and it hits a climax point and then plays back forward through the scenes that you've already experienced, but you see them from a different perspective. It makes sense differently when you see it going forward. And it's like the inspiration was the inspiration was twofold. There's this beautiful backmasking stuff that Shane plays with the guitar. It's like the guitar has been reversed. And it was like, what if the story went in reverse? But it's also that idea of, after you've had a big night, particularly at a venue like Ringers, and you might be, seeing the world through surreal eyes, and then when you replay play back through those events in the cold hard light of day, you realise the impact of your actions on yourself and others, that maybe it was not as nice as what you thought going into it. And we were trying to capture that. But it was really a beautiful process making this video, because I was working with so many of my ex-students. So there's a central female character in the video, and she was a student that I taught some years ago who'd gone on to study acting, and she conveys so much with these really beautiful, subtle facial expressions. And then there's also this group of young men who I've been teaching, because I teach in an all-boys school at the moment. And I said to them, we're going to tell this story about some harassment that a woman experiences in a pub. And the female actor, Annie Supriya, she said, this is something that I experience every time I go out, and to every woman that I know who goes out as well. And all of the boys were kind of committed to telling this story about toxic masculinity, which I thought was really, wonderful that they wanted to do that. I think sometimes we characterise young men as kind of being just a part of toxic culture, but it very much was generationally, no, we actually want to tell this story because we want to change people's behaviours. And I don't know that, like any piece of art is going to change the world, but it was a beautiful process of them all being committed to doing something meaningful about a big problem.
You touched on the title track earlier, The Cast. Tell us a bit more about that one. There's some vivid childhood memories there, from what I can see.
Yeah, I've never broken a bone before, and like I said, I had these images in my head of this, of COVID being like a cast that was keeping us still while we were broken, and then I kind of had this very strong memory about being a little kid and watching another kid at the school break an arm, and all of the attention that surrounded her, and that love and support. And there was this kind of, and how much I secretly wanted that texture-coloured love drawn on me. Like they were writing, all of their words of encouragement and support on the cast of this young kid. So that was the idea for the song, and it was a song that came very, very quickly. But as soon as I wrote it, I realised that this was this summed up everything that I was going through at this time.
The storytelling element of your songwriting, it's such a dominant feature of your work. What for you, apart from obviously a good story, is the key ingredient to effective storytelling in your mind?
I think you've got to be true to the character. So I think that often, and whether that character be a part of me at a particular point in time, or it be a completely fictitious character, like in Irrigation Channel, that's a completely fictitious character. But it's about being, trying to think like that person, and not judge them, but to be inside them, and to give voice to that experience of being inside it. Because I don't think no one is the villain of their own story. Everyone is the hero of their own story. So that's part of it. I think the other part is to spell out the textures of the space, what's there in the space. I wrote, like, one of the songs on the record is one called Butchering Day, which is about my experience of growing up and having this annual day where the whole family got together and killed animals and put them in the freezer. And the textures of that experience, and there's standing on a cattle grate, waving around a black poly pipe like it's a lightsaber. That's a real thing. And if you're in that space, you know exactly what that is like. And what's been really beautiful is when I share some of this stuff, particularly that song, and there's a couple of my friends who grew up in the country who had these immediate, I was it was like you were telling my story of being there, and I think I put it down to that experience of just like I said, trying to be true to the character and trying to tell the audience what it is that I see and feel and hear when I'm there in that space.
Now, I think Flying was the first song you dropped as a single on the album. Was there any particular reason you went for that one as the first one?
Oh, sorry, Dirty River was the first song.
Dirty River was first, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. But Flying, did you want me to talk about Flying?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So Flying I wrote about my brothers. They've been really important to me, especially through having lost mum and dad. I think I don't want to say this for everyone, but for me, my relationship with them changed significantly when we had to become mum and dad's carers, and then when we were grieving their loss, we had to be something else for each other. And one of my brothers is also very, very sick. So that's the inspiration for the song Them. But it's also trying to capture a moment from our childhood, which was full of kind of, I suppose, naive hope. And that is, we loved the film E.T. and we always had this fantasy that the BMXs would take off and we'd go flying over the back paddocks on our bikes, just like Elliot and E.T. did. And it was that kind of, that wish that we could just fly away from the bad guys. And unfortunately, like, you get to a point when you're older and you realise you can't fly away from everything, but you can still have those people that you're on the bike with.
Moving on to Dirty River, as a proud Melburnian, it's a standout song. You managed to pack in so many references to our fair city in just over 4 minutes. Where do you start with a song like that? Do you draw up a list of places and references you want to include, and were there any that you had to leave out?
I love that you think that there's a systematic process like that, but it's the truth is it just kind of started happening I think because during lockdown I had the arrow runs kind of back through the back end of our or about 500 metres away from our house. So through lockdown I had opportunity to walk along there and reflect about the river and its importance in my story, like my personal story, as well as the story of my city, as well as the story of the Wurundjeri people who were the traditional landowners of where my home is. And it was kind of an attempt to capture all of that sense of it's now, but it's then, it's me, but it's us. Yeah, so it's just kind of started off being a list of, if I was to put all of those things together to capture the me and the us and the now and the then, what would that look and sound like? And I kind of it kind of is, there's one point in the song where I talk about, there's a party out in Templestowe where I fell in love with you, and then it's kind of next to something that happened, universally, like across, that every Melburnian would have experienced. So it's those, it wasn't, I'm making it sound like I set out to do that, but it was more just like it that's what I ended up with. But that was, the inspiration was all of those, the amalgam of all those things.
Well, I was delighted you gave Noble Park a mention, which is where I was born and raised, and I don't think I've ever heard Noble Park mentioned in a song anywhere, so that was a treat for me.
I love that. Well, that's the thing about, I think, a lot of my writing, and that's part of when I wrote Swollen as well, is the same thing. It's like I've not heard this put in a song before. Like Butchering Day, I've not ever heard someone sing about killing a cow before. Like, and maybe there's good reason sometimes why some things don't end up in song, but I think we're so used to hearing American songs that sound like, oh, that's the way that music is. But if you kind of break it down to what it is that a lot of those country musicians did, like, well, even what Springsteen did, Like, he took the textures of his everyday life and he saw something poetic and something musical within it. He saw the melody within those things. And for me, that's kind of part of my mission as a songwriter. Is it's like there is poetry in how I live and how I have lived and how people around me live. And I want to celebrate us because I'm inspired by us. It's like that's the reason why I sing with an Australian accent, because that is the music of every person that I love.
Mm-hmm. Too Many Draws features a duet with Felicity Urquhart. And did you write that song with a duet in mind, or did that just something that came up in the recording process?
It wasn't something that I like did on purpose to write a duet. I wanted to write a story about Mum and how she was a hoarder and how she kept a ridiculous amount of things in her house because she saw all of it as being significant and holding precious memories. And I don't know if you've had, well, when we had to clean up Mum and Dad's house after they passed, it was that sense of like, well, what do we hold on to and what do we let go? And it's kind of this really horrible process of like picking through the bits and pieces of someone's life. That's kind of was the inspiration for the song. Mm. But after I wrote it, I was talking to Shane about Mum's relationship with Felicity Urquhart, because Mum would religiously listen to Saturday Night Country on ABC when Felicity was hosting it.
Oh, yeah. And
every Saturday night she would tune in, and sometimes she'd be listening to Felicity with one, a headphone in one ear, and then she'd have another headphone listening to a football match in the other. So she just would always be listening to Felicity. And when Mum got too sick to look after herself, she was at home. Dad was really sick and he was too sick to look after himself, and then Mum was trying to look after him. It was not working for either of them. And we eventually talked her into going into an aged care facility for respite. She wasn't all that old. She was only 69 when she died, but she was not well enough to care for herself. Mm. And so we eventually talked her in there, and I was thinking, this is really hard. She's leaving her husband behind. She's leaving her house behind. She rarely is away from home. This is going to be a terrifying thing. And I said, so Mum, is there something on that first night, is there something that I can bring around from home to make you, feel a bit more at home? She said, it's Saturday night. Can you bring a radio so I can have Felicity here with me? Mm-hmm. And it was this lovely thing of having, Felicity keep Mum company all that night. Like on a night when she was so terrified. Yeah. And so, yeah, like when I wrote that song and I kind of had this memory of Mum, and I asked Felice if she would sing it with me because of, this relationship that Mum had with her, and she said yes. So it was like just this really beautiful way of, just capturing that relationship. Oh, anyway.
Perfect. Yeah. Now, released through Compass Brothers again, who I guess you would call a specialist label in terms of the genre of music that they generally release. So it must be really comforting to have your music out there on a label that's sympathetic to the type of music you want to make.
Oh, absolutely. And Graham Thompson is he is Compass Brothers Records, and he loves that kind of singer-songwriter work. I think that's kind of like key in what it is that he's doing, and in that where the story and the song are key. Like I think that's kind of part of it, but also there's been lots of vulnerable parts of me out on this, record, and he's kind of been giving me strength to be able to do that. Like he really is. No, I think it's important for you to say, if that's what you want to say, I think it's important for us to do it. I mean, even like when we got the phone call that Mum was dying, like I was actually, we thought that she was going to be okay for a couple of weeks, and we got this phone call at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was at work at school, and I got this phone call to say, no, you've got to come now. And I was driving the 3 hours from Melbourne to where Mum was, and halfway along the road, she died. And I got the phone call on the trip to say that she wasn't with us anymore. And my wife was following in a car behind because she came from home and I'd come from work. So I couldn't talk to her. So I just called Graham, and he just talked me home. And, you know, that's the sort of, you know, like it's more than just that he was looking after my music. It's like he's looking after the human being that kind of makes that art. So, yeah, I'm very, very lucky to be working with him.
That's very rare on a record label these days, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So after this batch of songs is now out there, how's the storage chest looking of new songs in the Michael Waugh catalogue?
Yes, I'm constantly writing, but it's actually, I like space to be able to do. I like kind of improvising with words and challenging myself to sing things, and it's a bit hard when you're kind of stuck when everyone is in the house with you. So I've got lots and lots of songs ready to go, but not ones that I've had chance to really work through yet, because I'm in part too, like I think that there is this thing that happens with the recording process for me where there's the raw emotion and feeling and creation of the song, and then you put it into a form that you can share with somebody else. And that's the little demos that I give to Shane, and then he sends them back to me as these fully blown beautiful things, and then I piece them back together in a way that I share with audiences when I play. But it feels like some of these songs are still in an abstract space because I haven't yet been able to stand in a room and share them with people. And I think that these songs won't kind of be, as you say, like I'm not going to be able to close the lid on that chest until I'm really able to to have them come through me to other people and have other people's responses come back. Like I don't know where those songs sit yet in the world. So there's a part of me, usually I would be ready to start recording a new record by the time one is released. But this has been a very different process. And like I said, I need everyone to go to work so I can have some space to record, to write.
It all makes perfect sense. Well, yeah, touring plans, I mean, it's really hard to make any concrete plans at the moment, but I see you have sort of pushed everything back and you'll be launching this one officially in February, I think I saw down here in Melbourne.
Yeah. I think it's, I think everyone, I was really nervous about it because like I did so want to have everyone together to be able to, you know, you celebrate a record, and that's kind of that moment that I was talking about where we pieced it all back together. Here it is. But we'll see. I just can't wait to get back out on the road. And I'm so grateful that ticket holders are going, yeah, you're going to change it to a Sunday afternoon sometime in February. I'll be there. Yeah. And I just love that. So
that's great. As somebody said to me the other day, they'd rather be booking gigs and postponing them than not booking them at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I do, you know, there's a part of me too that thinks, wow, like when everyone's so hungry for music, like people who make music are hungry to get out there and play it. People who've not had a chance to get into to watch it, I think that they're hungry for that experience too. So I just know that it's going to be a big explosion of goodness that happens sometime as soon as everyone gets an injection in their arm.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, Michael, thanks so much for your time and congratulations on album number 4. And we're looking forward to installment number 5, whenever that may be. But before that, we want to see these songs live on stage and hope it's not too long. And congratulations on a wonderful piece of work. And we'll see you hopefully at the Memo in February.
That'd be great. Take care. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.